My sword slices through darkness, a whisper, almost a breath. Two men, one woman, a duel that would decide life. And honor, steel being drawn, a woman kneeling in a shadowed chamber, lips trembling in confession. Flash, a royal court murmuring behind jeweled hands. A muddy field, trampled grass, blood soaking into the earth. The last sanctioned duel in French history. A pause, then the question, was it justice? Or the cruelty of a dying code of honor? In the biting cold of a Parisian winter, on December 29, 1386, two men stood poised on the brink of history. One was Jean de Carrouges, a stern and decorated knight. The other, Jacques Le Gris, a handsome, favored squire at court. Between them stood a silent accusation, a claim so scandalous it threatened to shatter the very foundations of their world. This wasn't just a personal dispute. It was a trial by combat, the last one ever officially sanctioned by the Parliament of Paris. This was the story of the last duel. Our story begins not on the battlefield, but in the heart of the Norman countryside. Jean de Carrouges and Jacques Le Gris were once friends, even comrades in arms. They served the same lord, Count Pierre d'Alenan, but their paths diverged dramatically. Carrouges was a capable but often overlooked knight, constantly fighting for land and recognition. Le Gris, on the other hand, was charming, intelligent, and a master of courtly politics. He quickly became Count Pierre's favorite, showered with land, titles, and responsibilities that Carrouges felt were rightfully his. A bitter rivalry began to simmer, fueled by jealousy and perceived injustices. Lawsuits over property became commonplace, each one deepening the rift between the two men. But the breaking point, the event that would set them on a collision course with destiny, involved Carrouges' wife, Marguerite. While Jean de Carrouges was away on a military campaign in Scotland, a journey that took months, he left his young, beautiful wife to manage their estate. It was during this time that the unthinkable allegedly happened. Marguerite claimed that Jacques Le Gris, accompanied by an accomplice, forced his way into her chateau and under threats of violence assaulted her. When Carrouges returned, Marguerite confessed everything to him. In an era where such an accusation could bring ruin and shame not just upon the victim but her entire family, this was an act of incredible courage. For a woman to speak out was to risk everything. Carrouges, driven by a mix of love for his wife and his deep-seated hatred for Le Gris, believed her without question. He was enraged. He saw this not just as an attack on Marguerite, but as the ultimate personal insult from his rival. He immediately sought justice, but the legal system was stacked against him. He first took his case to their overlord, Count Pierre. But the Count, who favored Le Gris, dismissed the charges out of hand. He suggested that Marguerite must have dreamed it. Frustrated and denied a fair hearing, Carrouges did something unprecedented. He rode to Paris and appealed directly to the king himself, King Charles VI. The case became the sensation of the French court. The king agreed to hear it before the Parliament of Paris. The trial was a grueling affair. Marguerite had to recount her ordeal in excruciating detail in front of an assembly of powerful men. Jacques Le Gris, cool and collected, denied everything. He produced witnesses who provided him with an alibi, claiming he was miles away on the night of the attack, with no other witnesses to the crime itself. It was her word against his. The court was deadlocked. In medieval law, when a case reached such an impasse and involved a crime punishable by death, there was one final terrifying option: a trial by combat. The belief was that God would not allow the guilty party to triumph. The victor would be proven innocent in the eyes of God and man. The loser would be declared guilty, and the stakes were impossibly high. If Carrouges lost the duel, he would be killed, and Marguerite, for what would then be considered the crime of perjury, would be burned at the stake. So, on that fateful December day, the stage was set. The Abbey of St. Martin des Champs was converted into an arena. Thousands of spectators, from commoners to the king himself, gathered to witness the divine judgment. Marguerite, dressed in black, watched from a scaffold, her own life hanging on every thrust and parry. The two men, encased in full-plate armor, mounted their war horses. The marshal gave the signal. The duel was a brutal, desperate struggle. They charged, lances shattering against shields. They dismounted and fought with axes, swords, and daggers. The fight was long and grueling. Both men were wounded, their armor dented and bloodied. At one point, Le Gris managed to wound Carrouges in the thigh with his sword. The crowd gasped. It seemed as though Le Gris, the younger and physically stronger man, might prevail. But Carrouges, fueled by a ferocious determination, fought back. He managed to tackle Le Gris to the ground. Due to the weight of their armor, once a knight was down, it was nearly impossible to get back up. Pinning Le Gris down, Carrouges demanded a confession. "Confess your crime," he roared. Le Gris, his life fading, cried out, "In the name of God, and on the peril and damnation of my soul, I am innocent." Those were his last words. Carrouges, seeing no other way, drew his dagger and plunged it into Le Gris's throat, ending the duel and his life. The crowd erupted. Carrouges was hailed as a hero. He had been vindicated by God. He dismounted, went to his wife, and they embraced before the king. His honor was restored, and Marguerite's life was spared. She was celebrated for her courage. They returned to Normandy, and not long after, she gave birth to a son, further cementing the idea that God had blessed their cause. But history is rarely so simple for centuries. This was the accepted story, a tale of a valiant husband fighting for his wife's honor. But was it truly justice? Or was it a brutal spectacle, the last gasp of a barbaric tradition? What if Le Gris was telling the truth? What if his alibi was real? We can never know for certain. The duel didn't reveal the truth. It only revealed a winner. It silenced one man forever and left the other to live with the consequences of his violent victory. The very fact that this was the last such duel shows that even at the time, society was beginning to question this method of justice. The legal system was evolving, moving away from trial by ordeal and towards a system based on evidence and testimony, however flawed it might be. The story of the last duel is more than just a fight between two men. It's a story about power, jealousy, and the brutal realities of the medieval world. It's about a legal system where a woman's word was worthless without a man to fight for it. And most of all, it's the story of Marguerite de Carrouges, a woman who dared to speak up in a world that demanded her silence, risking a horrific death for a chance at justice. Her voice, echoing across 6 centuries, forces us to ask, what is the true meaning of honor, and what is the real price of truth? Let me know in the comments what you think. Was it justice or a tragedy? Imagine France at the close of the 14th century. This isn't the France of art museums and charming cafes. France at the end of the 14th century was not a kingdom at peace. It was a land still bleeding, a land exhausted by war. This is a kingdom on its knees, a land still bleeding from a war that feels like it will never end. For decades, the 100 Years' War had drained its treasury, its population, and its faith in order. Entire regions had been burned, abandoned, and reclaimed only to be burned again. Castles dominated the horizon not as symbols of safety, but of division. Each one marked a lord with his own ambitions, his own soldiers, his own justice. The countryside told the real story. Picture the French countryside. Entire regions have been scorched, abandoned by their people, reclaimed, and then burned to the ground all over again. The horizon isn't dotted with romantic castles. It's a jagged line of fortresses. These aren't symbols of safety, they are symbols of division. Each one marks a local lord with his own private army, his own personal ambitions, and his own brand of justice. The real story of France is written in the earth itself, villages half rebuilt, fields scarred by marching armies. The roads are no longer arteries of trade and travel. They're haunted pathways for desperate deserters, gaunt beggars, and all the forgotten souls left behind by the conflict. Famine moved as quietly as war, and plague had never fully released its grip, and stalking silently alongside the soldiers and the starving is famine, a constant creeping threat. The shadow of the plague, the Black Death, has never fully lifted, always threatening to return and claim another generation. This is a kingdom holding its breath, waiting for the next disaster. At the center of this fragile realm sat King Charles VI. He had come to the throne young, beautiful, and promising, but as he grew, something within him fractured. Without warning, he would fall into rages, screaming that his own companions were enemies. At times he did not recognize his wife, at others he did not recognize himself. His sanity started to crumble piece by piece. Without any warning, he would be seized by terrifying fits of madness. He'd fly into violent rages, screaming that his closest friends and advisers were his enemies, there to betray and kill him. He would run through the halls of his own palace, convinced he was made of glass and might shatter at the slightest touch. When the king's mind vanished, power rushed in to replace it. Great nobles formed rival factions. Princes of the blood maneuvered behind the throne. Royal justice became a battlefield of whispers, favors, and vendettas. His charismatic brother, Louis of, and his powerful uncle, Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, formed bitter rival factions. Royal justice, the very foundation of a stable kingdom, began to erode. A verdict in court was no longer about truth or law. It was about which faction had more influence, who owed whom a favor, who could apply the most pressure. And when justice weakens, older instincts return, honor becomes louder than law, strength begins to speak where evidence cannot. A man's power is measured not by his rights, but by the number of swords he can command. This was a world balanced between two ages, one foot in medieval tradition, the other stepping hesitantly toward centralized justice. It was into this unstable France that a private crime would be carried and transformed into a public ritual of blood. The kingdom was in a state of profound and violent transition. It was into this dangerously unstable world, this pressure cooker of paranoia, ambition, and fading certainties, that a private crime would be committed, a deeply personal accusation of violence and betrayal between two men. But in this France, at this precise moment, nothing could remain private for long. A personal dispute was about to be dragged into the public square. Tea would be twisted and magnified by the political rivalries of the day until it was transformed into something else entirely, a public spectacle, a national obsession, and a brutal, formal, public ritual of blood. The stage was set for the last duel. Imagine France in the 14th century, a time of chivalry, honor, and brutal justice, in the heart of a grand chateau, amidst flickering candlelight that makes shadows dance on cold stone walls. A story unfolds that will shake the very foundations of the kingdom. This is not just a tale from history. It's a visceral drama of courage, betrayal, and a woman's fight for truth in a world dominated by men. Trial by combat inside a stone chateau, far from the noise of court, a woman speaks. Her name is Marguerite de Carrouges. She is young, noble-born, recently married, and terrified in a private chamber lit by candles. She tells her husband that while he was away, another knight entered their home, Jacques Le Gris, a favorite of powerful lords, educated, wealthy, well-connected. She says he forced himself on her, that he ignored her pleas, that he left her knowing full well what such an accusation could cost her. In medieval France, a woman's word is fragile. Rape is not primarily treated as a crime against her body, but against a man's property and honor. If she is believed, Jacques Le Gris will die. If she is not, she may. Her husband, Jean de Carrouges, listens in silence, a rigid man, proud, bitter, a knight who believes deeply in honor, hierarchy, and divine justice. His face, etched with the lines of countless campaigns, contorts with a storm of emotions, disbelief, fury, and a burning desire for vengeance. For him, this is an unforgivable stain on his name and his honor. He believes her, and belief is only the beginning. He looks into Marguerite's eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, but finds only a steadfast resolve. In that moment, he makes a vow. He will stand by her. He will defend her honor, and by extension, his own, to the death if necessary. The accusation moves from chamber to court. Royal officials question her. Clerks record her words. The court divides. Some see courage, others see opportunity. Jacques Le Gris denies everything. He produces alibis, witnesses, powerful supporters. The case drags on, arguments twist, testimony conflicts, and slowly the machinery of law grinds to a halt. There is no proof, only a woman's word against a man's. Meanwhile, the accused, Jacques Le Gris, stands confident, even arrogant. He is a court favorite, charming, intelligent, and a powerful figure with influential friends. He vehemently denies the charge, painting it as a fiction born of a spiteful woman. His reputation is spotless, his word seemingly unassailable. This sets the stage for a monumental confrontation. The central question hangs heavy in the air. Can a woman's word, alone and unsupported, stand against that of a powerful knight? The case is brought before the Parliament of Paris, the highest court in France. The chamber is a sea of somber robes and skeptical faces. Marguerite is forced to recount her traumatic experience in excruciating detail, not once but multiple times, before a panel of male judges. Her every word, every gesture is scrutinized. She faces a barrage of invasive and humiliating questions designed to discredit her. Was she secretly in love with Le Gris? Did she invite his advances? Did she cry out? They question her character, her past, her very integrity. The legal arguments are fierce. Le Gris's lawyers are brilliant, using every loophole and social prejudice to their advantage. They portray him as a man of impeccable standing, a victim of a malicious lie. They argue that Marguerite's story is inconsistent, that she has a motive to fabricate the tale out of jealousy or hysteria. The court is deeply divided. Many believe Le Gris, swayed by his status and charisma. Others, though fewer, find Marguerite's testimony compelling, her quiet dignity unwavering in the face of immense pressure. The legal process drags on, becoming a public spectacle. Whispers and rumors fly through the streets of Paris. Marguerite finds herself isolated, judged by everyone she meets. Her life becomes a prison, her reputation in tatters regardless of the outcome. The court is at an impasse, with no definitive proof and two conflicting testimonies from members of the nobility. They are unable to reach a verdict. The situation seems hopeless for the de Carrouges, but then Jean de Carrouges, driven by a conviction in his wife's truth and a rigid code of honor, makes a desperate and unprecedented move. He appeals directly to King Charles VI, bypassing the deadlocked court. He invokes an ancient and almost forgotten tradition, a trial by combat, a judicial duel. He proposes that he and Jacques Le Gris fight to the death, and that God himself will decide the victor, thereby revealing the truth. The king's council is stunned. Judicial duels had been outlawed for decades, seen as a barbaric relic of a bygone era. To sanction one now would be a monumental decision. It's a high-stakes gamble. If Jean de Carrouges loses and dies in the duel, not only will his cause be lost, but his wife Marguerite will be declared a liar, and the punishment for bearing false witness in such a grave matter. She would be burned at the stake. After weeks of deliberation, the young King Charles VI makes his decision. The tension in the royal court is palpable as the decree is read aloud. The king sanctions the duel. It is a stunning twist that sends shockwaves throughout France. For the first time in generations, the fate of a legal case will be decided not by judges and lawyers, but by the sword. The verdict will be delivered by God through the bloody outcome of a fight to the death. The news spreads like wildfire. It's the talk of the entire kingdom, from the royal palace to the humblest tavern. It is the ultimate spectacle of honor, justice, and divine will. Preparations begin immediately. A special field is constructed. On the outskirts of Paris, at the Abbey of Saint Martin des Champs, scaffolding is erected for the thousands of spectators who will flock to witness the event, including the king and his entire court. For Jean de Carrouges and Jacques Le Gris, the world narrows to a single point, the coming battle. They are no longer just men. They are champions of their own truth, instruments of a divine trial. The weeks leading up to the duel are filled with intense preparation. Both knights, veterans of war, dedicate every waking moment to training. They spar with squires, practice their footwork, and sharpen their lances, swords, and daggers. They are two of the most skilled fighters in the realm, and they know each other's styles intimately from their days as friends and comrades in arms. This knowledge makes the fight even more perilous. Each man understands his opponent's strengths and weaknesses. They meticulously select their armor, each piece polished to a brilliant shine, a gleaming shell to protect them from the brutal force of their opponent's blows. But beneath the steel, the psychological toll is immense. They are not just preparing for a battle. They are preparing for their potential death. Jean de Carrouges fights for his wife's honor and his own. He believes God is on his side. He spends hours in prayer, his resolve hardened by a righteous fury. For him, victory is the only way to save Marguerite from a horrific fate. Jacques Le Gris, on the other hand, fights for his life and his reputation. He maintains his innocence. To the end, perhaps even believing it himself. He is the physically stronger and more athletically gifted of the two, and many consider him the favorite to win. He projects an aura of cool confidence, but underneath he too must face the terrifying possibility of his own demise. As the day of the duel dawns, a somber mood falls over Paris. It is December 29, 1386. A massive crowd gathers, braving the winter chill. At the center of it all is Marguerite de Carrouges, dressed in black, watching from a platform overlooking the combat field. She is the silent cause of this entire affair, her fate hanging in the balance. As her husband rides into the arena, their eyes meet one last time. It's a moment charged with love, fear, and the crushing weight of everything at stake. The two knights, clad in full plate armor and mounted on powerful war horses, face each other across the field. The marshal of the duel raises his baton. A hush falls over the thousands of spectators. The knights lower their visors. The world shrinks to the narrow slit of their helmets. The final brutal chapter of this story is about to begin. What happens next will become the stuff of legend, a tale whispered for centuries. It is the last officially recognized judicial duel in the history of France. The decree is read aloud before nobles, before clergy, before the people. Jean de Carrouges will fight Jacques Le Gris in a judicial duel, and God himself will decide who speaks the truth. The meaning is unmistakable. If Jean wins, his wife Marguerite is vindicated. If he dies, she will be burned alive as a false accuser. The year is 1386. In the cold gray light of a Parisian morning, a castle courtyard buzzes with a grim energy. This isn't a tournament. This is a matter of life and death, a trial by combat sanctioned by the king himself. Today, two men, once the closest of friends, will fight to the bitter end to determine the truth. This is the story of France's last judicial duel. Across France, word of the duel spreads like fire. The last sanctioned duel, the return of blood justice. Heralds rehearse the rules. Nobles whisper, gossip, and place wagers. Some hope for spectacle, others for a final resolution. Inside the stark stone walls of the armory, the air is thick with the scent of polished steel and nervous sweat. Sir Jean de Carrouges, a man whose face is a hardened map of countless battles, stands stoically as his squires begin the long process of arming him. Each piece of plate armor is a testament to his life as a warrior. The greaves for his shins, the cuisses for his thighs, the heavy breastplate emblazoned with his family crest. Each buckle is tightened with methodical precision. He says nothing, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on a point only he can see. For him, this duel is not just for his own life, but for the honor of his wife, Marguerite. In another part of the castle, his opponent, Jacques Le Gris, undergoes the same ritual. Le Gris is a different man. Entirely charming, educated, a favorite at court. As his own armor is fitted, his demeanor is one of cool confidence, almost arrogance. He jests with his squires, his voice echoing in the chamber. He is a man who has always won, whether in the courtroom, the royal chambers, or on the battlefield. He has denied the accusations against him with unwavering conviction, and now he prepares to prove his innocence with the point of his sword. As the knights are armed, a different kind of preparation is underway. Both men prepare not only their bodies, but their souls. They confess their sins, they pray, they write their wills. In a small chapel, priests in solemn vestments perform ancient rites. They bless the weapons, the long swords, the lances, the daggers. Holy water is sprinkled upon the sharpened edges of steel, and prayers are chanted, invoking God to favor the truthful and strike down the liar. This duel is seen as God's own judgment, and these rituals are meant to sanctify the ground. Meanwhile, Marguerite waits alone. If her husband falls, she will not be allowed to mourn him. She will be executed right beside his corpse. Outside, the duel field has become a theater of anticipation. A massive crowd has gathered, a sea of faces from every walk of life. Peasants stand shoulder to shoulder with merchants and artisans, all drawn by the morbid spectacle of justice being decided by bloodshed. They whisper and point, their voices a low hum of speculation. For them, this is the ultimate drama, a real-life story of honor, betrayal, and revenge. In the stands reserved for the nobility, the atmosphere is different. Here, the tension is laced with political maneuvering. Nobles, dressed in their finest silks and velvets, place bets on the outcome. They gossip about the scandal, their loyalties divided. Some support the grizzled warrior Carrouges, respecting his unyielding sense of honor. Others favor the charismatic Le Gris, a man more aligned with the modern sensibilities of the court. King Charles VI himself is present, his youthful face a mask of solemnity, his presence lending ultimate authority to the proceedings. High above the crowd, a herald steps forward, a long scroll in his hand, his voice amplified by the sudden silence rings out across the field. He reads the royal decree, detailing the accusation made by Marguerite de Carrouges and the denial by Jacques Le Gris. He declares that since the court could not determine the truth, the matter will be settled by God through this trial by combat. As he speaks, the stakes become terrifyingly clear. The winner will be declared innocent. The loser, if he survives, will be executed immediately for perjury, and if Carrouges falls, his wife Marguerite will be burned at the stake. The moment has arrived. The gates at opposite ends of the field swing open. First, Sir Jean de Carrouges rides out on his warhorse, a massive beast just as heavily armored as its rider. He is a figure of pure grim determination, his lance held steady. The crowd murmurs, a wave of sound passing through the stands. Then, from the other side, Jacques Le Gris appears, his armor gleaming in the pale sunlight. He looks every bit the confident champion, offering a slight nod towards the royal box before turning his attention to his adversary. The two men ride to the center of the field, stopping a lance's length apart. For a moment, there is absolute silence. A trumpet sounds, a single piercing note that shatters the silence. The duel has begun. The two knights lower their visors, enclosing themselves in a world of limited vision and muffled sound. They lower their lances, spur their horses, and charge. The ground trembles as the two war horses thunder towards each other. The crowd holds its collective breath. Years of friendship, a lifetime of honor, and the fate of three people are all riding on this single violent collision of wood and steel. The impact is a deafening crack, a shower of splintered wood as their lances shatter against shields. And this is only the beginning. The brutal fight on foot with sword and axe and dagger is yet to come. On this day, only one man will walk away, and the truth, whatever it may be, will be written in blood. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into history's most incredible moments. In the crisp air of a Parisian winter, on December 29, 1386, a spectacle was about to unfold, one that would be talked about for centuries. This wasn't just any duel. It was a trial by combat, the last one ever officially recognized in France. The stakes, life, death, and honor. Two men, once friends, now stood as mortal enemies on the grounds of the Saint Martin des Champs monastery. One was the grim, battle-hardened knight, Jean de Carrouges. The other, the polished, charismatic courtier and squire, Jacques Le Gris. In the stands, a young King Charles VI watched intently, and somewhere nearby, a woman named Marguerite de Carrouges prayed. Her life, her very truth, hung in the balance. If her husband, Jean, lost this fight, she would be burned at the stake as a false accuser. The charge was heinous. Jacques Le Gris, she claimed, had brutally assaulted her while her husband was away. Le Gris denied it with every fiber of his being. With no witnesses and conflicting testimonies, the law of the land reverted to an ancient, brutal tradition. Let God decide the victor, and thus the truth. As the sun cast its first golden rays over the field, the crowd fell silent. The marshal of the duel announced the rules and the gravity of the day. Jean de Carrouges and Jacques Le Gris, encased in shining plate armor, mounted their powerful war horses. They were a fearsome sight, each a product of a lifetime of training in the art of war. On one side, Carrouges, a man whose life had been a series of battles and perceived slights, fighting for his wife's honor and his own. On the other, Le Gris, a favorite of the powerful Count Pierre d'Alençon, confident in his innocence and his prowess. They lowered their visors, a metallic click echoing in the tense silence. Gripping their heavy lances, they stared each other down across the length of the dueling ground. The signal was given. With a thunderous roar, hooves tore into the earth as they charged. The impact was cataclysmic, wood splintered against steel as their lances struck home. Both knights reeled but managed to stay in their saddles, a testament to their exceptional horsemanship. They wheeled their steeds around for another pass, the crowd roaring with a mix of excitement and dread. Again and again they charged, their lances shattering, each trying to unhorse the other. It was a violent ballet of heavy cavalry, a brutal display of martial skill, but neither man could gain a decisive advantage. Their horses, now exhausted and wounded, became liabilities. Recognizing the stalemate, they dismounted, abandoning the jousting phase of the combat. The fight was about to get far more personal, far more savage. They drew their longswords, and the real duel began. On foot, the nature of the fight changed entirely. The ground became a churned-up mess of mud and grass. Their heavy armor, which offered protection, also weighed them down, turning every movement into a grueling effort. Steel rang against steel in a relentless, percussive rhythm. Sparks flew with every parry and strike. Carrouges, the more experienced soldier, fought with a dogged, ferocious determination. Le Gris, though equally skilled, was perhaps more of a tournament fighter, his style more refined. They exchanged blows, each testing the other's defenses, looking for a weakness, an opening in the plates of steel. A powerful strike from Carrouges dented Le Gris's helmet, sending a shockwave through his body. Le Gris answered with a swift counterattack, the point of his sword scraping along Carrouges's breastplate. The crowd gasped and murmured with every significant blow. This was not sport. This was a desperate struggle for survival. Both men were bleeding. Small cuts and deep bruises were inevitable, even through the armor. The physical toll was immense. Fatigue was setting in, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Then, a turning point. Le Gris, perhaps seeing an opportunity, lunged forward. His blade found a gap in Carrouges's thigh armor, plunging deep into the muscle. A cry of pain escaped Carrouges's lips as he staggered back. The crowd gasped. It seemed the tide was turning in Le Gris's favor. He pressed his advantage, his attacks becoming more aggressive, forcing Carrouges onto the defensive. For Marguerite, watching from afar, this must have been a moment of pure terror. The man who had defended her honor was wounded, and his opponent was closing in for the kill. The duel and her life seemed to be slipping away, but Jean de Carrouges was a survivor. He had fought in brutal campaigns and stared death in the face before. Drawing on his last reserves of strength and rage, he fought back from the brink. As Le Gris moved in, confident of his impending victory, Carrouges did the unexpected. He tackled his opponent, using his sheer body weight to bring them both crashing to the muddy ground. Now it was a primitive brawl. Their swords were lost in the struggle, and they wrestled in the dirt, gauntleted fists hammering against helmets. Carrouges, being the stronger wrestler, gained the upper hand. He pinned Le Gris down, drew his dagger, a merciless weapon designed for piercing armor, and held it to his opponent's throat. He tore open Le Gris's visor, revealing the terrified eyes of the man who had once been his friend. "Confess." Carrouges roared, his voice muffled by his own helmet. He demanded that Le Gris admit his guilt before God and all who watched, but Jacques Le Gris, with his last breaths, looked up and proclaimed, "In the name of God, and on the peril and damnation of my soul, I am innocent." There was no confession. For Carrouges, this sealed Le Gris's fate. With a final, desperate act of violence, he drove his dagger into Le Gris's throat. A shudder ran through the squire's body, and then he was still. Silence descended upon the field, broken only by Carrouges's heavy, labored breathing. He had won. The duel was over. Jean de Carrouges rose from the body of his slain rival, a bloody and battered figure against the morning sky. He was the victor. According to the laws of God and man, his cause was just. He had not only saved his own life, but had vindicated his wife's honor. Marguerite was now seen not as a liar, but as a truthful woman whose claim had been proven by divine judgment. The crowd, moments before frozen in suspense, erupted. Some cheered, some were in shock, but all looked upon Carrouges with a new-found reverence. He walked towards his wife, and as he knelt before King Charles, he was declared a hero. His victory brought him fame and fortune, clearing his family name forever. The body of Jacques Le Gris was unceremoniously dragged from the field and later displayed publicly, the fate of a man judged guilty by combat. The story of the last duel became a legend, a stark reminder of a time when justice was sought not in a courtroom, but on the bloody tip of a sword. The duel is over. Jean de Carrouges stands victorious in the courtyard of the Château de Vincennes, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. The body of Jacques Le Gris lies on the cold ground, a stark testament to the day's brutal verdict. As the crowd erupts, a mix of cheers and stunned silence, Carrouges slowly makes his way to his wife, Marguerite. Their embrace is not one of joyous celebration, but of profound, bone-weary relief. Her honor, and by extension his, has been defended in the eyes of God and man. Royal officials move in, their faces grim and professional. Scribes dip their quills in ink, meticulously documenting the outcome. This wasn't just a fight. It was a legal proceeding, and its conclusion must be recorded for posterity. The duel, a method of trial by combat, has delivered its judgment. Jacques Le Gris is declared guilty. His name will be forever stained, his body treated as that of a convicted criminal, hanged and displayed for all to see. For Marguerite, this is vindication. Her testimony, which had been questioned and scrutinized, is now validated by the point of a sword. The court of public opinion, swayed by the divine judgment they believe they've just witnessed, now largely sides with her. She is no longer just an accuser. She is a survivor whose truth has been proven. But as the initial shock subsides, a different kind of tension settles over Paris. The streets buzz with talk of the duel. Was this truly justice? Or was it merely a spectacular, bloody form of entertainment? People gather in taverns and town squares, debating the events. Some see it as a clear sign of God's will, a righteous outcome for a virtuous lady. They praise Carrouges' bravery and Marguerite's steadfastness. To them, the system worked exactly as it should. A knight fought for his wife's honor, and God granted him victory, proving her word true. Others, however, are not so sure. They whisper that Carrouges was simply the better fighter, the luckier man on the day. What if he had stumbled? What if Le Gris's lance had struck true? Would that have made Marguerite a liar? Would she have been burned at the stake for a false accusation, simply because her husband lost a fight? This question hangs heavy in the air. It exposes the terrifying fragility of justice when it rests not on evidence or reason, but on the outcome of a violent clash. The duel, meant to be the ultimate arbiter of truth, now looks to many like a high-stakes gamble with human lives and reputations. This public debate highlights a fundamental shift in thinking. The world was changing. The old ways of feudal justice, where might was often equated with right, were beginning to feel outdated and barbaric to a more sophisticated society. People were starting to question whether a physical contest could truly reveal a spiritual truth. The duel between Carrouges and Le Gris became a focal point for this unease. It was a powerful symbol, but a symbol of what exactly? Was it a triumphant last stand for the age of chivalry, or a grim illustration of its inherent flaws? For the French monarchy and its legal system, the event served as a stark wake-up call. The duel had been a massive public spectacle, drawing attention from across the kingdom and beyond. It was messy, unpredictable, and ultimately it undermined the authority of the courts. King Charles VI and the Parliament of Paris had sanctioned this duel, but witnessing its brutal reality and the divisive aftermath, they recognized the need for change. Relying on divine intervention through combat was no longer a tenable way to administer justice. The legal system needed to be based on investigation, evidence, and reasoned judgment, not the strength of a knight's arm. And so this dramatic confrontation would have a legacy far beyond the lives of the three people at its center. The duel between Jean de Carrouges and Jacques Le Gris became a turning point in legal history. It was the last trial by combat ever officially sanctioned by the Parliament of Paris. The practice, once a cornerstone of medieval law, was effectively abandoned, relegated to the pages of history books. It marked the symbolic end of an era, a final bloody chapter in the long story of judicial duels in France. The system was evolving, moving away from archaic rituals and toward a more modern conception of law and order. After the ordeal, Jean and Marguerite de Carrouges attempted to return to a normal life, but they would forever be defined by this event. They received financial rewards from the king and were held in high esteem. Their survival and victory were seen as a mark of divine favor. Marguerite went on to have children, securing the Carrouges lineage. Jean continued his military career, eventually joining a crusade against the Ottoman Empire. His life, like it began, ended on the battlefield, a knight to the very end. But the story doesn't just fade away there. It became a legend, a cautionary tale passed down through generations. Chroniclers like Jean Froissart captured the drama, ensuring its place in history. For centuries, the tale of the Last Duel was remembered as a thrilling story of honor, betrayal, and justice. But looking back from our modern perspective, the story takes on a deeper, more troubling meaning. It's a powerful reminder of the terrifying position of women in a world dominated by men, where their truth and their very lives could depend on the outcome of a fight between two men. Marguerite's voice, her testimony, was at the heart of it all. She risked everything to speak out, facing public shame and the horrifying possibility of being burned alive if her champion fell. Her courage in the face of such an unforgiving system is perhaps the most enduring part of this legacy. The duel may have been fought by Jean de Carrouges, but the battle was truly Marguerite's. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, truth, and the nature of justice itself. It's a stark illustration that history is not just a collection of dates and battles, but a series of intensely personal stories, stories of individuals who fought for their truth against incredible odds. What are your thoughts concerning the Last Duel of France? Do you think the victor was innocent and the vanquished guilty? I'd like to hear them in the comments below, but here's my thought: I don't know who was telling the truth. That's the first thing I have to admit. I wasn't there, no one alive was. And yet, for centuries, people have spoken about this duel as if certainty survived the field along with Jean de Carrouges. I don't share that confidence. I was taught that justice means evidence, that truth is something we approach carefully, knowing we may never fully reach it. So when I look at the last judicial duel of France, I feel a kind of a knees I can't shake, because the past doesn't just disagree with me, it contradicts me. In 1386, they believed God would intervene, they believed innocence could not fall, They believed that steel, guided by divine will, could speak where words failed. I don't believe any of that. I believe swords answer only one question: who was left standing? Jacques Le Gris died because he lost a fight. That is the fact. Everything else is interpretation. His death was taken as proof of guilt, not because evidence appeared, but because medieval society could not tolerate uncertainty. They needed an ending that felt absolute. I understand that need. I just don't trust it. What troubles me most is Marguerite. Her voice reaches us only through documents written by men who lived in a world that expected women to lie, to tempt, to exaggerate. And yet she spoke anyway. She knew that if her husband fell, she would be burned alive for false accusation. That knowledge sits heavily with me. I can't dismiss it. Would I stake my life on a lie? Would I watch my fate hinge on a duel I couldn't fight in? I don't think so. That doesn't prove she was telling the truth. But it makes her courage undeniable, and courage matters to me more than ritual. Jacques de Carrouges complicates things further. I want him to be a hero. History invites me to see him that way, but I can't ignore that he had reasons beyond justice. He had lost favor, lost land, lost prestige often to the very man he accused. His obsession with honor feels sincere, but also sharp, edged with resentment. Two things can be true at once. He may have believed his wife. He may also have needed the duel to reclaim himself. The medieval world didn't see this as a contradiction. I do, and then there's the king. Charles VI sanctioned the duel because it solved a problem he didn't know how to judge. To them, this was humility letting God decide. To me, it feels like surrender, a choice to let violence carry responsibility because human judgment was too fragile. The duel ended the case. It didn't end my doubt. That's where I part ways with the Middle Ages. They walked away believing justice had been done. I walk away believing something essential was lost: the willingness to admit we don't know. That uncertainty doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it's the only honest outcome. I don't believe God spoke through that duel. I believe people were afraid of silence, afraid of a truth that couldn't be neatly declared, afraid of living with questions instead of verdicts. The Last Duel of France wasn't the triumph of justice. It was the moment justice realized it needed to change, and maybe that's why this story still matters, not because it gives us answers, but because it forces us to confront the kind of answers we're willing to accept. I can't accept this one, and I won't pretend that makes me neutral. The year is 1386. The air in Paris crackles not with the chill of winter, but with the heat of anticipation. A duel is about to take place, a spectacle of honor and steel that will echo through the halls of history for centuries to come. This wasn't just any fight. It was the last judicial duel ever sanctioned by the King of France and the Parliament of Paris. This is the story of how one final, brutal clash between two men marked the end of an era and forged a legacy that still fascinates us today. At the center of this storm were two figures: the grim, determined knight Jacques de Carrouges and the skilled, confident squire Jacques Le Gris. Their conflict, born from accusations of a heinous crime against Carrouges's wife, Marguerite, was to be settled not in a courtroom with lawyers and judges, but on the field of combat under the watchful eyes of God and King Charles VI. In the medieval mind, this was the ultimate trial. God himself would grant victory to the man who fought for the truth. But what happens when the very idea of truth and justice begins to change? This duel, fought on a cold December day, was more than just a personal vendetta. It was a turning point. It represented the final dramatic gasp of an old world order, a world where a nobleman's honor was his most prized possession, and his sword was his ultimate legal argument. Could honor survive without blood? This was the question hanging in the balance. For centuries, trial by combat had been a legitimate, if brutal, method of resolving disputes that couldn't be settled by other means. It was a system built on a foundation of faith and feudalism. Your personal strength, your skill with the lance and sword, was seen as a direct reflection of your righteousness. But by the late 14th century, the ground was shifting beneath their feet. The French monarchy was growing stronger, centralizing its power and establishing a more systematic, bureaucratic form of royal justice. Imagine the scene, ancient, hand-scribed legal texts filled with the laws of the land, side by side with epic poems and chronicles detailing the glorious deeds of knights in battle. The courtroom and the tournament ground were two sides of the same coin, but the coin was about to land on a new side for good. The Carrouges-Le Gris duel became a flashpoint, a moment where the old ways and the new ways collided in a spectacular public fashion. The royal court, which sanctioned the duel, was also the very institution that was working to make such duels obsolete, as Jean de Carrouges and Jacques Le Gris charged at each other, lances shattering against shields. They were unknowingly performing the last act of a long-running play. The outcome would decide their personal fates, but the event itself would symbolize something much larger, the twilight of the knightly ideal and the dawn of a new age of law. The state, not the individual, was becoming the ultimate arbiter of justice. The pen was, slowly but surely, becoming mightier than the sword. Let's step back and look at the world they inhabited. Medieval France was a complex tapestry of feudal obligations, religious fervor, and a rigid social hierarchy. For men like Carrouges, a Norman knight, his reputation was everything. It was tied to his land, his title, and his service to his count. When Jacques Le Gris, a court favorite, was accused by Marguerite de Carrouges of a violent assault, it wasn't just a personal matter. It was an attack on Jean's honor, his household, and his very identity. Marguerite's role in this is absolutely crucial and often overlooked. In an age where women were afforded few legal rights and their testimony was often dismissed, her steadfastness was extraordinary. By publicly accusing Le Gris, she risked not only social ruin, but her own life. If her husband, Jean de Carrouges, were to lose the duel, it would be taken as a divine sign that her accusation was false. The punishment for such a false claim, to be burned at the stake. Her courage was the spark that lit the entire fire. She wasn't a passive prize. She was an active participant, risking everything for a justice she believed in. The legal process that led to the duel was a labyrinth. After Marguerite's accusation, the case was initially heard in the court of Count Pierre d'Alanan, the overlord to both men. Le Gris was acquitted, partly due to his influence at court. But Carrouges refused to accept this verdict. In a bold and desperate move, he appealed directly to the king in Paris. This elevated the case from a local dispute to a matter of national importance. The Parliament of Paris, the highest court in the land, heard the testimony, but with no witnesses to the alleged crime and with Le Gris providing an alibi. The court was deadlocked, and so they reverted to the ancient custom, trial by combat, a judicial duel. The king's approval transformed the duel from a simple fight into a state-sanctioned event. A special field was prepared. Stands were erected for thousands of spectators, including the king and his entire court. It was the biggest show in town, a fusion of legal proceeding and public entertainment. This spectacle itself highlights the transition that was occurring. It was both a solemn legal rite and a thrilling piece of theater, a final bloody performance of a dying tradition. On that fateful day, December 29, 1386, the two combatants entered the arena clad in full plate armor. They were like two iron statues brought to life, each a symbol of a different path. Carrouges, the old-school warrior, fighting for his wife's honor and his own name. Le Gris, the courtier, the more modern man, perhaps representing a system where influence and connections could outweigh traditional martial prowess. The fight was brutal and grueling. They charged on horseback, their lances splintering. They dismounted and fought with axes, swords, and daggers. The crowd watched, breathless. Every clang of steel on steel, every staggered step, was interpreted as a sign from above. The battle was long and vicious, and both men were wounded, but in the end it was Jean de Carrouges who stood victorious. After disarming Le Gris, he demanded a confession. When none came, he delivered the final, fatal blow. With Le Gris dead, the verdict was sealed. God, it was believed, had spoken. Jean de Carrouges had been vindicated, and Marguerite's honor was restored. She was seen as truthful, and he as a righteous champion. He was hailed as a hero, showered with gifts and renown. He had won. But the victory was a bittersweet one, and its legacy is far more complex than a simple triumph of good over evil. In the immediate aftermath, Carrouges became a celebrity. He had gambled everything and won in the most dramatic way possible, but the world he returned to was one that no longer had a place for his brand of justice. Just a few years later, the French monarchy officially moved to further curtail the practice of judicial duels, strengthening the royal courts and making such spectacles a thing of the past. The system had moved on. The duel became a legend. Chroniclers of the time, like the famous Jean Froissart, recorded the event in vivid detail, ensuring its story would not be forgotten. It became a powerful tale, a morality play about courage, justice, and divine intervention. For centuries, it was remembered as a clear-cut case of a hero defending his wife's honor. The duel became a cultural symbol, a touchstone for discussions about justice, honor, and the end of the age of chivalry. But history is never that simple. As time went on, interpretations changed. Was Carrouges truly a hero, or a stubborn man clinging to an outdated code? Was Le Gris a villain, or a victim of a flawed system and a bitter rivalry? And most importantly, we are left to wonder about Marguerite. Her truth was validated by her husband's sword, but her own voice was ultimately silenced by the spectacle of male combat. Her story became a footnote in his. The duel's legacy, therefore, is not just about its dramatic conclusion, but about the profound questions it forces us to ask. It marks the precise moment when the concept of justice began its long, slow evolution from a personal, violent affair to an impersonal, institutional process. The scales of justice, once balanced by the tip of a sword, were now being placed firmly in the hands of the state. The story of the last duel has been told and retold in books, plays, and even a major motion picture, each generation finding new meaning in this medieval drama. It reminds us that the way we seek truth and justice is not fixed. It evolves with our societies, our beliefs, and our understanding of the world. The clash between Jean de Carrouges and Jacques Le Gris wasn't just the end of their personal conflict. It was the end of an era, a final, bloody farewell to the world of trial by combat, and the birth of a legacy that continues to challenge and captivate us more than 600 years later. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into history as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that explore the incredible moments that have shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what you think about this story of justice and honor. See you next time.